Hello, welcome back to BLENDERSUSHI Live Noding. In this video, I'm going to share with you one of these kind of experimental idea. I was basically inspired by the work of GMUNK. This is like a video from 3 years ago when he showcased one of his work that's basically created using Maya, and he basically probably created this tool, like an app that allows him to generate geometry parametrically, and then he brought it to Maya and rendered it out as a kind of like a geometric pattern. And it's actually, in a way, it's kind of simple, and I kind of want to try to do it using Blender. Some of the render that he did looks like this. If I can switch to Google search. Okay, there's some of his other works. You might have seen it in the movies, like maybe the Avengers of Iron Man. But anyway, his geometric work looks something like this. If you're probably familiar with some of this kind of structure, it looks like Kaleidoscope. It's a bit it's a little bit abstract, probably not for everyone, but nevertheless, this is something that I always interested in. I actually I bought one of this camera that does 360, and it's called Recordera S, and I've been using it for a while. I really love what it does. It's basically with a single shutter click, you can capture 360 image of the environment, and you can kind of do that in Blender. And I've been using Recordera server to upload some of my 360 artwork. Don't tell Rico, but it's actually taken using it was actually rendered using Blender. So it looks a bit like this. I can make it full screen. It's quite nice. This one you might remember. I made something like this using spherical. There are others as well that this one is slightly more complex, but it's actually really simple. This is also created using spherical. It's using one of their nodes. But the one that I'm gonna show you today is something that's more like this. It's similar to GMUNK kind of work. Basically, the simplest way to think of it is like we provide some kind of spherical 3D mesh that's with some kind of interesting tessellations. It's totally up to you how you're gonna do the tessellations. You can use the Blender modifier, or you can use any other add-on. Basically, you need a spherical kind of design because it's gonna look nice when you look at it in the 360. So I'm gonna show it to you how you might approach that in Blender. So I don't know how I'm going to do this video tutorial. Basically, it's probably aimed for a person who never used Blender but interested to do this kind of 360 artwork. But eventually of course you need some kind of familiarity with Blender, and you can do a lot more, and you can generate all kind of amazing looking 3D objects and then render it as 360. I think that's one thing that can be explored for even for like a long time 3D artist that's been using Blender. This might be something you want to do because 360 and VR is becoming more and more popular nowadays. So produce more 3D artwork and let's see where it goes. Okay, let's start with Blender. This is the default Blender scene. You have this the default cube that you can just delete, and you have the lamp and the camera. We can delete the lamp for now because we don't need it. We can leave the camera. We're gonna need a camera to do the render. But I'm going to quickly switch to Cycles render. So we're gonna do it inside Cycles render, not the default Blender render. Cycles render is a newer render engines that Blender has, and it can render like a highly realistic, physically based renders kind of thing. It's similar to Arnold or the latest Pixar RenderMan. You can also render it using other render engine, but I will gonna use the one that Blender has. So switch to Cycles render, and let's see how we're gonna approach this. I'm gonna show you what I usually do to get, to start. I'm going to do something that's really simple. It's gonna involve nodes because it's gonna be using Cycles material, but this is gonna be super simple, and maybe if you're a long-time Blender user, this video tutorial is just too basic. But anyway, I'm gonna show it to you. So with the camera, of course, we're gonna render like a 360 kind of image. So I will center the camera, and the way to reset the camera is to, there's a hotkey for that. It's Alt G. Alt G gonna reset the position of the camera to 000. So Alt G, you see how it resets the locations, and then Alt R actually resets the rotations. And by default, this Blender camera is always pointing down below like that to the ground. For our case, it doesn't matter too much, but sometimes you wanna, maybe you want the camera to be pointing in the Y axis, so you can rotate it in the X axis. Let's see, yeah, like 90 degrees. So RX 90 degree actually. Let's reset it again. RX 90 degree is gonna make the camera pointing that way. It doesn't matter too much for what we are doing. And what else we should do? Maybe I should create a geometry real soon. So this is gonna be like a GMUNK inspired. Gonna save the file real quick. So like I said, to produce works that looks like this, we should start with geometry that's kind of spherical. And the one I like to use is the icosphere. So I create these objects, and these objects tend to be created on the 3D cursor. That's the Blender default. So if I create another one, you know, it's gonna be spawned on the where the 3D cursor is. I'm gonna delete that. I'm gonna center these objects. Again, Alt G. It's gonna center that object, and I can scale it. So this is default. This is the default, and even with this, you can kind of get quite nice looking render. It's a if we want to render 360 right away, we're gonna set the camera so that it renders in the equirectangular kind of design, or let me show it to you what's the equirectangular looks like. So this is equirectangular. It's basically when you render the whole 360 image and then you flatten it into square, you get a render that looks like this. This is a equirectangular. This is the how the image actually looks like before you upload it to, maybe you upload it to Facebook or Recoteta website, and they will be able to display it as 360 image. And simply by selecting the camera, and then you go to the camera setting, by default it's rendering in the perspective. If I show it to you, let's go inside the camera, and that's what you look through the camera. If I render it out, it's probably gonna render black because it's rendering from inside of the sphere. but we're gonna do something. Okay, set the camera so that it renders in panoramic, and switch these to Equirectangular. Now you actually rendering in the whole 360 kind of like the whole environment, and that's actually pretty much what you need to set up. There is another thing with the render setting. In order to make it work with a Recortera app and their server, you need to ensure that the ratio is 2 to 1. Let's say you have like 2000 pixel here. This one should be 1000. So that's kind of a equirectangular kind of dimensions. I'm gonna do like a smaller one. Let's see if I'm doing it like 1080. This guy should be 1080 divided by 2. So it's a yeah. This is the size that the Recortera app will take. And let's see. Okay, the next thing we should do is we're gonna apply material to this object so we can render it out. At this point, like I said, it's gonna render black because this object is because we are rendering from inside the object, and the object is actually casting shadow. If I turn on the environment lighting for this guy, like a use nodes in the world, like a dome, let's apply a sky texture. From the outside, we can actually see the icosphere. So it's looking like that. It's just an icosphere, but you can render it out. But from the inside, you can see nothing. It's just black. What you need to do if you want to render from the inside is you wanted to select the object, select the icosphere, and turn off the shadow, and then try rendering it again. Now we actually can render from the inside of the object. But for what we are doing today, I'm really gonna just apply like a texture, like a random texture for these objects to render. And I'm gonna show you like a few tricks that I found. If something to do with the vector, in order to get like a parametric render, like a nice looking render, simply by applying texture. Okay, I'm gonna stop the render. And gonna switch to cycles. Gonna switch to the node editor. We're gonna use node because this is live noding, so there must be some kind of node workflow here. I'm selecting the objects and I switch to the cycles material shader, and then I'm gonna create a new shader for it. And by default, it has the diffuse material. We're not gonna use the diffuse. We're gonna use emission. So emission is kind of like the object's gonna emitting light, so it doesn't. You don't need to worry about providing light. It's gonna render the whole thing as a flat kind of light. So it's a self-emitting kind of material. And I'm going to use texture. And I'm gonna start with using just gradient texture. And let's apply it. And let's try a render. So by default, this is what you get. It's nothing. It's not too exciting, but you want to see from the inside of these objects. So we're gonna switch into the camera view and render it again. So now we are looking from the inside of this icosphere. It's still not particularly interesting. However, if you switch if you use the geometry node and then plug in the parametric into the vector, hopefully we can start seeing something. Okay, that's kind of the result I'm expecting. It's not yet It's not particularly interesting yet. You can also use probably pointiness. Not so much. Wait, pointiness to the vector doesn't seem to work quite well in this case. Can switch back to parametric. Probably should go back out and then make this object slightly more interesting. Let's say we can do it in a couple of ways. Actually, if you break these objects, if you break the polygons and separate all the faces, and then you randomly assign a texture, it's gonna look starting to look interesting. But I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna do like a, let's say, subdivision surface. Okay, you start to get kind of more interesting tessellation of these objects. It's not yet brilliant or anything. You can also do like a triangulations or maybe like a smoothie. Let's try smoothie. And yeah, it's kind of more interesting. Starting to get more interesting geometry. You can also do things like this wireframe, and the wireframe, if you give like a really high thickness, now that's kind of a, it looks like a complex geometry. In fact, if I'm not wrong, if you look from the inside, yeah, that's a lot nicer. In fact, maybe we don't need to use the smoothing, and that's what we get. So let's do it like this. I think that should be good enough for what we're doing. If I jump in the inside and render now we start seeing something that's more interesting. Let's see. Let's switch back to the camera view. Okay, that's the equirectangular kind of design that I was expecting, and this is by plugging the parametric vector into the gradient texture. But you can do all sort of other texture that you can do. They are all procedural textures, so you can play around with it. The magic one tends to give something that's really abstract. Let's have a look. So that's really like super detailed kind of design. It's a bit psychedelic as well, but if you render it out and upload it to website that can take a 360 image, maybe if you like this kind of design. But I found that the magic textures tend to be too abstract, so let's try something that's a bit more subtle. The noise, maybe the wave texture actually kind of interesting looking. It's just like lines. You see how that's a little bit more subtle, but this will work quite well actually if you upload it to the Recog Theta website. Let me try a quick render. So basically, if you are doing it like this, it's rendering in the viewport. This is actually just the preview of the final image. If you really want to render it out, you just go to render menu and render image with a hotkey F12. So if I render image, you will see that by default it's rendering pretty slow, but in a kind of higher resolutions. But it's really slow. I recommend you to play around with the sampling. Sometimes you only need maybe a single sample. So by default, you see the preview gives you the maximum of 32 samples, and the render will take you to a lot higher samples. Sometimes I just switch this to one sample, and we can render it really quick. So it's one sample, it's super fast. So this is going to be your final image. Yeah, it's really simple at this moment, but I'm gonna show you another way you can approach this. Let's cancel that. You might also notice that the tessellation is a lot higher when you render it out. That's because of the modifier. By default, the subdivision has this kind of setting. So in the preview, it's a one time subdivision. In the render, it's 2 times. Maybe you want to just switch to lower tessellation. It's totally up to you. So that's if we render it again, this is what we get. Let's continue exploring the texture. So that's what you get if you use the band. You can also use the ring. See, it's updating in real time. You can maybe make the scale smaller. This kind of flowery pattern. Let's switch to saw. Another flowery pattern. And if you want to perhaps add some colors, this is by default the wave will give you just like a black and white. But if you want to have some color, you know, you can use the color ramp. Plug that in and plug the color there. And by default, of course, the color ramp is also black and white, but you can easily add color. And there you go. It's kind of like gradient kind of color. This also a little bit simple, but just feel free to explore this pattern. You can randomize the vector and do all kind of, just give it a try, and let's see what you get. Gradient, okay, you can do image texture. I will do that real quick. Point density, Voronoi, let's try Voronoi. Put that in there. So Voronoi, slightly more detailed. Make this smaller. Yeah, maybe that's interesting. It depends how you, what kind of tessellations objects that you fit in into the sphere, basically. So if you go back, and that's what we get. But from the inside, that's kind of the design here that you have. Kind of like a cell. That's definitely more interesting. Maybe increase the thickness too high. Cells tend to change color depending on the scale. Starting to get the thing with this kind of design. It's like kaleidoscopic in a way. It's the more you add details to it, the more you get a kind of abstract looking design. So you probably, if you want to approach that, feel free to do that, but it's totally up to you. Sometimes you want it to be a little bit more subtle. This is actually not too bad. You can render it out and it's gonna look good. I will render this and save it real quick. So again, at one sample it's really fast. Sometimes you need a higher samples, otherwise it's gonna produce noise. So I'm gonna save this again. So that's one way you can approach this. That's the simplest way you can do. But the next thing I want to show you that at the moment we are using this emission, and the color tends to be really flat because there is no shading, no lighting. This is just like a flat texture. If you're using like an image texture as well, you get something that's more interesting, although again it's still flat. But let's see if I'm using this image and plug this in. That's what we get at the moment. Let me plug in the parametrics into the vector, and there you go. That's a little bit more interesting, but you can do a lot better. If you start like mixing the gradient texture or foreground texture, any kind of procedural texture into this guy, you start to get like all kind of interesting design. It's very very complex, very abstract, but maybe that's what you want, you know. Just give it a try. There's like unlimited kind of pattern that you can produce just by using, just use any kind of photo that you have and then just plug it in, just doing it like this, and you can generate abstract design like this. And it's actually like, again, it's actually like 360, and it's gonna look nice when you upload it into Facebook as 360 image. There is one more thing that you can do. So instead of having this guy as an emission material, you can use shader, glass shader. So with the glass shader, so if you're doing it like this, and let's do a render test, you basically looking from the inside of a crystal, kind of, or like a diamond. Imagine yourself going inside a diamond and rendering the outside world. So you might see something like this. And at the moment, it's just, I'm just using the Blender sky texture that we can kind of rotate the sun, so we get a different kind of lighting environment. But you get also quite a nicer image, and you can play around with this index of refraction 1.2, or the roughness. Maybe just zero out the roughness, and this is what you get. Maybe use sharp or GGX multi-scatter. If I'm not wrong, because we already turned off the shadow from this object, we can actually now it's actually rendering from the inside. If I turn on the shadow, it's gonna be, normally it's gonna be black if I use like a diffuse shader, but now it's no longer dark, so you can play around with this as well. You see, it's gonna render a little bit slower, and you will get like noise. But if you wait for a while, this actually gives you nice kind of shading. It's the effect is a lot nicer if you use like translucent, for example, or subsurface scattering kind of material. You might also get a interesting kind of look. Let's have a look at what's we gonna get if we do it. Translucent tune maybe, or a velvet. Maybe velvet also give a nice kind of pattern. It's really depend on the object itself. If we look at the actual objects, let me switch back. Okay, this is the actual objects, and so that's what the object is looking at the moment. Now that's actually quite nicer with a velvet shader. If we change this, let's change the turbidity, maybe Yeah, that's quite beautiful. And let's jump back inside the camera. It's a little bit darker inside. If it's a velvet material, so maybe we need to increase the strength of the sun and sky. Maybe leave it for a while. Let's look at the work by GMUNK. I think GMUNK is I know but I know about GMUNK back few years back, maybe 10 years or more ago, when I was like still like a graphic design student, and I remember seeing one of his presentations in Sydney, and it's a motion graphics kind of website, kind of design. But nowadays he seems to be working on like a movie. But this is some of his geometric works, and again, it's a if you work on the geometry further, instead of at the moment we are just using a simple icosphere and then just use a modifier to do that, to do the design. But you can do a lot more complex design, obviously, and generate abstract work like that. And at the moment I'm doing it in 3D, but you don't always need to do it in 3D. I think maybe just working on using perspective camera, you can get an interesting design. Yeah, even a pattern like this. Let's get back to this. It's slightly more interesting looking. Maybe I'll show you one more way you can approach this. Like I said, if you use sphere chalk, or if you separate the faces of this geometry and start randomizing the texture, you start to get like a more complex kind of design, more pleasing to the eyes. Let me show that real quick. Actually, you can do like a random kind of design real quick. I switched to sphere chalk. So again, sphere chalk is an add-on that you can download. It's using sphere chalk, you can use this node-based kind of workflow to produce all kind of procedural or parametric design. What I'm going to do is just gonna separate all the faces of these objects. So I'm gonna source the objects first of all. Get the object. I'm gonna turn on pose modifiers because I want this subsurf to be used inside SphereChop. Now the nodes you're gonna use is just polygon boom, and with polygon boom we actually separating each of every faces of these objects. And now we just need a viewer bmesh mk2, and we are pretty much done. You can see the number 240. That means we have 240 faces being generated. Give it a material, and we are ready, I think. Let me hide the original objects. That's the sphere chalk generated object. It's a smaller because I forgot to do the matrix apply. Let's do that real quick. Now the object should be back in the original size. You can see that each of the faces is now a separate objects, and that can be kind of advantage for us, because a single material with multiple objects, you can easily randomize it in cycles. So in fact, I'm gonna show it to you real quick. So the name of the material is SV material at the moment. If I use geometry or object info, and there's a random here, if I plug in the random to color, I believe I'm gonna get random color. Yeah, At the moment it's using the diffuse material, so let's see. Let's check it out from inside the camera. So at the moment the object is actually casting shadow, so that's not gonna work for us. Let's not to use diffuse material for now. Let's just use the emission once again and plug in random into that guy, and there you go. So now because each of the polygon face is separate, we can actually easily colorize the polygons using cycles. So that's a big advantage for us. If you want to color, you can also do that real quick. Just apply noise texture, I believe. If we use random into, plug in the random into vector and plug the color there. I was expecting to see like a random color. Maybe I did something wrong. There you go. Maybe the location is better. So depending on the object location, it should have different color. No, it's not doing it. Back to random. Okay, that's another idea. But in order to make it more interesting, back to spherical, and I will gonna show you vertex color. Vertex color new, and these nodes can colorize the polygon vertices and gonna produce like a random color. I think I show you this a couple of times, but either you're randomizing the face color or the vertex color or the loop. I'm gonna use the loop and I'm going to produce like a random color. And we need to worry about the count. I don't know how many vertices we have, maybe 960 vertices. I'm not actually guessing, I'm looking at this vertices number over there. And now back to the material. If we just plug in the vertices color, spherical there, spherical, and plug into the color. Hopefully we can see. There you go. That's actually spherical kind of a color that we get from spherical. It's using this loop. If I switch to vertices, I'm gonna get a different result. Well, it's not seem to be doing it. If I'm switching the seed, I'm getting a different color. I think with loop we can do more. Maybe I need to do something with the random vector here. If we switch to face, it's gonna randomize the face color. It's probably depending on the index. Maybe I should put a randomize into the index. Well, I can't remember at the moment, but yeah, but at least we are getting this kind of result. Which is not too bad. You can generate like unlimited number of color variations this way. Maybe if I give it like a larger number. No, still nothing. I can't remember what I should plug into the index, but maybe use an integer range. Plug in there. Maybe 240 faces. I cannot remember, but one of this value. Start, stop, step. Yeah, probably. I think I need to revisit this node. But I guess this is it's pretty much what I want to show you today. Let's get back to the material. If we are using like a glass shader and mixing it with our emission mix shader, let's see what we get. So we're probably gonna get the texture from outside, which is the sky texture, and combined with our color. It's not like brilliant looking at the moment, but really it really depends on how familiar you are with the cycles render. You definitely can get a much more interesting result. Yeah, so I guess that's pretty much for this basic kind of look into abstract 360 artwork that you can create using Blender and Cycles Render. There's a lot. There's like unlimited pattern you can generate using maybe using spherical or animation nodes. And currently I'm just showing you a way we can just render a single frame, but remember that you can always do like an animation, and 360 animation is much more interesting to look at. And if you have like a VR glasses, this is something that you can kind of give your friend a look, and it's gonna give like a wow effect. So this is the advantage of using procedural workflow is you can generate like a 360 environment and make animations that like a never-ending kind of animations, because it's all procedural. Maybe you use particles. I don't know. It's totally up to you how creative you are in designing the 360 environment. But basically, in this video, I'm just gonna show you and share with you how we can render 360 using Blender. So set your camera right. Just put it in the center for now, and set it to Equirectangular. And set the resolutions to ratio 2:1 ratio. And if you upload it to Facebook or Recalculator website, you're gonna get like a 360 kind of viewer. Sometimes Facebook just takes the image right away, but sometimes you need to edit the metadata and add like a recall and recall theta, like a recall as the camera model, or recall theta as the camera model. Have a look. Just Google search for how to upload 360 into Facebook. You will see that you need to edit the metadata so that it's matching the recall theta, and then Facebook will recognize it as a 360 image, and that way you can produce this kind of 360 image and share it to your friend, and your friends can look at it and view it on their mobile, and it's gonna rotate in 360. So yeah, so there you go. That's just an idea that you can use to produce a abstract 360 image using Blender. Hopefully you like this video. Please leave comments and let me know if you have suggestions. Show me your works, and subscribe to this channel. And thanks again for watching this video, and I'll